While many Pokémon have a singular look for their species no matter what, there are a good handful of Pokémon that actually have different forms. There are two main different types of forms a Pokémon can have: permanent and non-permanent. Permanent forms are, like the name suggests, permanent, meaning that form cannot be changed no matter what. Non-permanent forms, however, are ones that can be changed, whether it is by interacting with an item or even just in battle only. Sometimes different forms can lead to different stats or even different move learn sets, and sometimes the form is just purely visual. Starting off, we will go with the Pokemon with permanent forms, and no Pokemon is better to kick us off than what is probably the most popular and recognizable Pokemon with forms, Unknown. Unknown is a Psychic-type Pokemon that comes in a whopping 28 forms. That's right, 28. Debuting in Generation 2 where it only had 26 forms, it had one for each letter of the alphabet, allowing for messages to be spelt out with them. In Generation 3, 2 more forms were added, the exclamation point and the question mark forms. These forms are all purely visual. Unknown may not be a very strong Pokemon, but with its different forms, it makes for a very fun Pokemon in the lore department. Moving on, we get to Shellos in its evolution Gastrodon. Introduced in Generation 4, this Pokemon has 2 forms, the West Sea and the East Sea. Your way of obtaining these forms are simply whether you are on the west or east side of the map, which serves as more like fun little world building. Like with Unknown, the differences are solely visual, allowing for you to choose whichever form you like with no worry. Next up, we get to Basculin. First introduced in the 5th generation, Basculin came in Red Stripe and Blue Stripe forms. They are version exclusives for the most part, and they can also have different abilities. While they share adaptability and their hidden ability Mold Breaker, Red Stripe exclusively gets Reckless and Blue Stripe gets Rockhead. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, we were introduced to White Stripe Basculin. White Stripe gets access to the ability Rattle, and is also the only form of Basculin able to evolve into Basculegion. Our next entry on the list, Vivillon, is the most interesting in terms of acquiring the forms. Vivillon has 20 different forms, coming in different patterns in its wings. In the 6th and 7th generations, how the forms of Vivillon is determined is by the region of your 3DS. That's right, the form of your Vivillon is based on where you are located in real life. It is not just Vivillon, as its pre-evolutions Scatterbug and Spupa also have invisible forms that keep track of the Pokemon's origin, so that a Scatterbug caught in a certain region will always evolve into its proper form. Also important to note that Fancy and Pokeball forms were event exclusive. Vivillon went missing from the main series games until Scarlet and Violet, where by default, everyone is the once event exclusive Fancy pattern. To get the original 18 forms, you have to send postcards from different regions of the world collected in Pokemon Go to Scarlet and Violet, and it will change all of Vivillon line forms spawning to the matching pattern for the rest of the day. Next we have the Flabébé line, where the entire line comes in 5 different colors: red, blue, yellow, white, and orange. These forms are all purely aesthetic, and mostly being determined by what color of flowers you encounter them in. The Pumpkaboo line is next, where it comes in small, average, large, and extra large varieties. This applies to both Pumpkaboo and Gourgeist. These forms aren't purely visual either, for as they increase in size, their HP stat increases and their speed lowers. Also, specifically for Gourgeist, the attack stat also increases alongside the size. Lycanroc is our first form difference in this list that isn't determined by first encounter, however ends up being time-based. If you evolve your Rockruff during the day, you get the midday form, and if you evolve it at night, you get the midnight form. These forms have different learn sets, stat spreads, and abilities. That's not all for this Pokemon, however, for there's also the Dusk form. This form is far more exclusive than the other two, for it has to evolve from a special Rockruff, and during dusk, this form follows suit in the other differences between the forms. Speaking of that special Rockruff, it is technically a different permanent form. Originally being an event exclusive, and then eventually findable in the wild, this form of Rockruff can only have the ability Own Tempo, and can only evolve into Dusk form Lycanroc. Rockruff isn't the only Pokemon with a form like this, as there's Battlebond Greninja. This Greninja is a special gift from the Sun and Moon demo that has a unique ability called Battlebond. This ability allows it to transform into Ash Greninja after knocking out an opponent. This Greninja, unlike Own Tempo Rockruff, is unable to be bred, and thus still locked to only being obtainable from that demo. Next up we have Minior, which has 7 different colors it can be, each reflecting one of the main colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. These color differences are purely visual. The mythical Pokemon Magearna has 2 forms: its original form that's obtainable in the Sun and Moon, and a special original color form that is a special gift for completing the National Dex in Pokemon Home. This form is purely aesthetic, and serves as a special reward for completing such a huge task. Moving on, we have Toxtricity. Toxtricity has 2 forms, amped up and low-key. The form of Toxtricity you get is determined by what nature Toxel has when it evolves. These forms have slightly different learn sets, but other than that, it's mostly just visual again. Alcremie, the queen of alternate forms, for it has a grand total of 63. These forms are all purely visual, and the differences are determined by the sweet you give your Milcery to hold, what direction you spin, how long you spin, and the time of day you spin. They really allow for you to get an Alcremie that's perfect for you, even if they went a bit overkill on the whole thing. Our first legendary on the list, Urshifu, has two forms which are dependent on what scroll you have your Kubfu interact with. The Scroll of Waters gives you the Rapid Strike form, and the Scroll of Darkness grants the Single Strike form. Visually, the two forms carry different stances, and mechanically have different movesets, stats, types, and even unique Gigantamax forms. Paldean Tauros is a rare case, for regional forms aren't being included in this list. However, Paldean Tauros has 3 different forms for itself. The Combat Breed form, that's always findable, and 2 Virgin exclusive forms. The Blaze Breed exclusive to Scarlet, and it gains the Fire typing, while the Aqua Breed is exclusive to Violet, and it gains the Water typing. Our next entrant is Squawkabilly, having 4 different forms, in which its main colors changes. No major differences between the forms. However, the yellow and white plumage forms have a different hidden ability than the green and blue plumage forms. Sinistea and its evolution Poltegeist have 2 forms, Phony and Antique. The Antique forms are very rare forms that can only be found in the wild, and require a unique item to evolve. The only difference is visual, and it's a very hard to see stamp of authenticity on the bottom. Poltegeist and its evolution Sinistea follow the exact same formula, a very rare form with a minor visual difference that requires a unique item to evolve. Mousehold and Dunsparce are going to be lumped together on this one, as their form differences are quite similar. Most of the time you'll get a family of 4 Mousehold and a 2-segment Dunsparce. However, there's a 1 in 100 chance that when you evolve a Tandem Mouse or Dunsparce, that they will evolve into a Mousehold family of 3 or a 3-segment Dunsparce. Moving on, we have Tatsugiri, which has 3 different forms, the curly, stretchy, and droopy forms. On its own, these forms are purely aesthetic. However, when paired with Dondozo, the form dictates the boost that is granted. Curly boosts attack, droopy boosts defense, and stretchy boosts speed. What should be the last of our permanent form differences is with Gimmighoul, where in the main games you can only obtain the chest form, while the roaming form is obtainable exclusively in Pokemon Go, and has to be transferred over. Both of these forms evolve into Golden Goal no matter what. These different forms have different stat spreads. A little footnote for this section is gender differences. There's just over 100 of them, mostly being from the first 4 generations. For the most part, they are very minor. The gender differences at starting in Gen 5 forward, while becoming a lot more sparse, are also far more noticeable. Meowstic, Indeedee, Basculegion, and Oinkologne are in a more of a middle ground between gender difference and full-on different forms, having slightly different stats, movesets, or abilities. Before we move on, just a reminder that if you are enjoying the video, please leave a like and maybe even subscribe. I truly appreciate it, and it really does help out the channel. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment down below, even if it's just what your favorite form is. Also, you may notice that there is now a join button. This allows you to become a channel member, which grants you the perks of channel emotes, a channel badge, and you will have your name added to the end of these videos. Becoming a member is greatly appreciated, but will not be mandatory for enjoying videos on this channel. Thank you, and let's get back to some weird Pokemon forms. Our next list of form differences are non-permanent forms. The non-permanent forms themselves can be further categorized by being either able to retain the form outside of battle, and the ones that are only able to be seen in battle. The latter will be our next focus. I mentioned earlier how Battle Bond Greninja changes form in battle, and such also matches its classification. Along similar lines is Minior, which while having 7 different permanent forms, it has a battle-only form due to its ability Shields Down. This ability grants it its Meteorite form when it's sent out into battle and is above 50% health. When Shields Down gets activated, it reverts to its core form, and in doing so it swaps attack and defense stats, and also doubles its speed. Next we have the Pokemon that is probably the face of in-battle form changes, Castform. Castform is able to change form based on the weather effect currently taking place in battle. In Strong Sunlight, it takes on the Sunny form and becomes a Fire type. In Rain, it becomes the Rainy form and swaps over to the Water type. And in Hail, it becomes the Snowy form and turns into an Ice type. Speaking of changing form in Strong Sunlight, we also have Cherim, who's usually found in its Overcast form, but when exposed to the sunlight, it turns into its Sunshine form. During Sunshine form, Cherim's attack and special attack stats are increased. Both Unova and Galarian Darmanitan have the hidden ability Zen Mode, which allows it to transform into its Zen Mode form once its health falls below 50%. The form change swaps its stats around, as well as changes the typing. We add another mythical to the list with Meloetta, who usually is in area form. However, when in battle, if Meloetta uses the move Relic Song, it'll transform into its Pirouette form, which switches its stats to be more physical than special, and changes the Psychic typing for fighting. Aegislash has 2 very straightforward forms, the Shield form and the Blade form. Defaulting to the Shield form, Aegislash will transform whenever it uses an attacking move, swapping its attack and defense stats in the process. Aegislash will revert to its Shield form if it uses the move King's Shield or is swapped out. Our next entry on this list is Wishy-Washy. In its default solo form, it has quite low stats. However, when it's sent out into battle and it has at least 25% health, it'll transform into the Schooling form, where it gets a massive boost in both attack and both defense stats. Introduced in the 7th generation, Mimikyu comes with its Disguise ability that puts it into its Disguise form at the start of battle. Acting kinda like a substitute, Disguise form allows the user to be hit and avoid damage, or take 1/8 of its max health starting in Gen 8. Once Mimikyu has been hit, its disguise breaks and turns into its busted form, where it can be attacked like a usual Pokemon, and will stay busted until it either faints or the battle ends. In a similar vein to Mimikyu, we have Ice-Q. Ice-Q has two forms, Ice Face and No Ice Face. When sent out, it will be in Ice Face form, and will stay that way until it is hit by a physical attack, in which it will negate the damage and transform into the No Ice Face form. The form change also comes with a change in stats, lowering its defenses and raising its speed. Unlike Mimikyu, however, Ice-Q can revert to its Ice Face form if it's either hailing or snowing on the battlefield. Next up we have the legendary duo of Zacian and Zamazenta. These two spend most of their time in their Hero of Many Battles form. However, if they hold a specific item, the Rested Sword for Zacian and the Rested Shield for Zamazenta, they'll transform into the Crowned Sword and Crowned Shield forms respectively when they are sent out into battle. The Crowned Sword form raises Zacian's attack stats and its speed stat, while the Crowned Shield form raises Zamazenta's defense stats and lowers its speed stat. Cramorant is a very interesting addition to this list, as it technically has three forms. Majority of the time, it'll be in its normal form. Whenever Cramorant uses either Surf or Dive, it'll scoop up another Pokemon in its mouth, which it will launch at its opponent after getting hit. If its health is above 50%, it'll turn into Gulping form, where it will have an Arrokuda in its mouth. Launching the Arrokuda will do damage and lower the opponent's defense. If its HP is below 50%, it'll turn into Gouging form, where it'll scoop up a Pikachu. Launching the Pikachu will deal damage and paralyze the opponent. Up next is Morpeko, which has two forms and changes between them after each turn. It starts in the full belly mode by default, and will swap to Hangry mode, and then continuously swap between the two. The form change is mostly visual, however it does change the type of the move Aura Wheel, swapping between Electric and Dark type. Generation 9 introduced us to the resident superhero Pokemon, Palafin. While by default Palafin looks very similar to its pre-evolution Finizen, but with a heart on its chest. This is the Zero form. However, when Palafin first switches out of battle, you'll find that when it returns, it will be transformed thanks to its ability, Zero to Hero. As you might have guessed, this new look is the Hero form, and it's not all for show, as both attack stats and both defense stats see significant boosts. The hidden treasure of Area Zero itself, Terrapagos, also has special in-battle forms, spending most of its time in its normal form. When Terrapagos is sent into battle, it transforms into Terrastal form. Yet this is not all, for when you Terrastalize it, it will turn into its Stellar form. Each of these forms sees stat increases from the previous form. Our next couple of entries will serve as a good transition point between categories, as they have both out-of-battle and only-battle non-permanent forms. First up is Zygarde. Zygarde has three forms, 10%, 50%, and 100%. 50% form is the main Zygarde you know and love, and 10% is obtainable by using the Zygarde Cube to change its appearance. Both 10% and 50% forms are able to have the Power Construct ability, which allows for them to transform into the 100% form when they reach below 50% HP. As the percentage of the form increases, their stats increase alongside it, except for speed, which lowers instead. Next is Necrozma, which is able to fuse with either Lunala to become Dawnwing's Necrozma, or fuse with Solgaleo to become Duskmane Necrozma. These forms combine the different attributes between Necrozma and the Pokemon it fused with. But that's not all, for if either of these two forms hold the Ultra Necrozium Z, it will have the option to Ultra Burst, which is very similar to Mega Evolution. This grants a good boost to both attack stats and the speed stat. Speaking on Mega Evolution, I'll add them and Primal Reversions, as well as Gigantamax forms as a little footnote here. They are in-battle forms that are able to be used once per battle that give the Pokemon unique design and stat increase and changing abilities for Megas, and exclusive max moves for the Gigantamax forms. With that, we move on to our final section, the non-permanent outside of battle form changes. Starting us off, we have the mythical Deoxys. Originally, Deoxys' four forms were version exclusive. If it was in Ruby and Sapphire, it would be in its normal form. Attack form in Fire Red, Defense form in Leaf Green, and Speed form in Emerald. Thankfully, the version exclusivity remained only in Gen 3, as once we got to Gen 4, it became as easy as just interacting with meteorites found throughout the regions. As expected, the forms have different stat spreads, matching the form names. Our next one is also a bit interesting. Burmy has three forms, and change depending on where Burmy last battled. If it was a grassy area, it will become the Plant Cloak form. Caves, beaches, and other sandy areas lead to the Sand Cloak, and in buildings or on roads, it will become the Trash Cloak. The secondary typing of these forms are different, being grass, ground, and steel respectively. Whatever form Burmy is in when it evolves into Wormadam, it will become the permanent form for Wormadam. Also, while invisible, Mothim technically recalls the data of what form it was before evolving. Up next is one of the other most recognizable Pokemon with forms, Rotom. Rotom has 6 battle forms, including his base form and 5 different forms based on machines it can possess. When Rotom changes form, its ghost type changes, its stats change, and it learns a unique move. Mo Rotom becomes grass and learns Leaf Storm, Frost Rotom becomes ice type and learns Blizzard, Heat Rotom becomes fire type and learns Overheat, Fan Rotom becomes flying type and learns Air Slash, and Wash Rotom becomes water type and learns Hydro Pump. Its ability doesn't change, so that makes Fan Rotom a flying type with Levitate. Rotom also has other forms throughout the series that don't act as usable Pokemon, such as the Rotom Dex, the Rotom Phones, Rotom Drones, and the Rotom Bike, among others. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, the legendary trio of creation, all have their base forms. In Platinum version, Origin Form Giratina was introduced and was achieved by having it hold the Grisius Orb. The form change ushers in an ability and stat spread change. Dialga and Palkia wouldn't follow suit until way later in Legends Arceus. This is where they finally got origin forms for themselves. Since Legends Arceus doesn't have health items, they changed forms just by using the Lustrous Globe for Palkia and the Adamant Crystal for Dialga. These forms also changed their stats. When moving to Gen 9, these forms are now dependent on hold items, and so they brought over the Globe and Crystal to allow for them to change. With Dialga and Palkia now having 2 health items, the Grisius Orb was changed to be like the Lustrous and Adamant Orbs, and the Grisius Core from Legends Arceus is also brought over to transform Giratina into its origin form. Up next is Shaman, who has 2 forms, the Land form and the Sky form. Land form has a solid 100 in every stat and is pure grass type, while Sky form has the stats jumbled around and it gains the flying type. To change Shaman's form, you need to use the Gracidia flower on it. Shaman reverts to land if it becomes nighttime, is frozen, or in any game before Legends Arceus, deposited into the PC. Following is the Pokemon right after Shaman in the Pokédex, Arceus. Arceus has a special ability that allows it to change the type it is depending on what plate it is currently holding. By default it is normal type, but thanks to the plates it can turn into any other type. The changing of types also changes the type of Arceus' signature move, Judgment. Legends Arceus introduced a new form for Arceus using the Legend Plate. This form allows Arceus, when using Judgment, to transform into whatever type will be super effective against the opponent. Arceus' middle ring changes color to match whatever type it currently is. Silvally, being a man-made recreation of Arceus, has the RKS system ability, and that allows it to change types using the battle memories. Like with Judgment, Silvally has the attack multi-attack, which changes type depending on the memory Silvally is holding. The fins on Silvally change color to reflect its current type. Deerling and its evolution Sawsbuck have a unique way of form changing. The Unova region games feature a season mechanic that changes monthly, and your Deerling or Sawsbuck, if used in a season, will change form to reflect the new season. As expected, its forms are spring, summer, autumn, and winter. After Gen 5, it becomes impossible to change their form due to the lack of the season mechanic. However, in Generation 9, this was remedied by having it dependent on what part of the region you are currently in. The forces of nature, Tornadus, Thundurus, Landorus, and Enamorus, are all by default in their incarnate forms, where they kinda resemble genies. In Black 2 and White 2, the Reveal Glass was introduced, allowing for them to transform into their Theron forms. These Theron forms are much more animal-like than their incarnate forms. The forms have differing abilities and stat spreads. Next on the list is Kyurem, who can fuse with either Zekrom to become Black Kyurem, or fuse with Reshiram to become White Kyurem. These forms will take on the ability of the Pokemon fused with Kyurem and receive stat changes, Black being more physical-oriented and White being more special. Another mythical makes the list, this one being Keldeo. This Pokemon, usually found in its usual form, can be changed to its Resolute form upon learning the move Secret Sword. The form change is purely visual and completely dependent on whether or not Keldeo knows the move Secret Sword. This next entrant is one for fashion lovers. Furfrou, normally looking like an unkempt dog, can receive 9 different trims: Heart, Star, Diamond, Debutant, Matron, Dandy, Lorraine, Kabuki, and Pharaoh. These trims are purely visual and will revert after 5 days or if the Furfrou is deposited into the PC. Our final mythical to make this list is Hoopa, usually in its confined form. If the prison bottle is used on Hoopa, it allows for it to change into its unbound form, where it gets a drastically different look. The unbound form gets a boost to some stats, changes the ghost type to dark type, and even has its own exclusive move, Hyperspace Fury. Oricorio is a flying type Pokemon from the Alola region that has 4 different forms, and while they totally seem like they would be permanent forms, they are fully changeable, thanks to different nectars. The yellow nectar will change it to Pom-Pom style, where it gets the electric typing. Red nectar will make it become Bale style and fire type. Pink nectar nets you the Pow style and psychic type, and finally the purple nectar will make it Sensu style, as well as a ghost type. Oricorio's move, Revelation Dance, also changes type alongside it. We have another case of fusions with Calyrex. However, unlike the ones mentioned before, instead of the 2 Pokemon becoming one, Calyrex just kinda mounts its loyal steeds. Ice Rider Calyrex has it riding Glacier, switching its grass type to ice and boosting stats, while Shadow Rider Calyrex has it riding Spectrier and changing its type to Ghost and also giving the stats a boost. These fusions grant the ability as one, which allows for Calyrex's usual ability and the ability of the Pokemon he fused with to both still activate when in play. I believe the final entrant is Ogerpon, having 4 different forms based on the mask that she is currently holding. By default, she uses the Teal mask and is a pure grass type, and has the Defiant ability. Giving her the Wellspring mask will change her to a grass water type and give her Water Absorb. The Heartflame mask will make her a grass fire type with the ability Molt Breaker, and finally the Cornerstone mask will make her a grass stone type with the ability Sturdy. Ogerpon's signature move, Ivy Cudgel, will change type based on the type granted by the mask, and the cloak she wears also changes color to match the masks. Alright, I believe that should be all of them. It is quite possible I missed one somewhere, as there is just a lot. Once again, would really appreciate a like and a subscribe. It really, truly does help out the channel. Still, would love to hear from you down below, even if it is really just what your favorite Pokemon form is. Well, anyway, this has been Big Blast 99. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have yourselves a goddamn good one.